let me do it this way. Hopefully the microphone's working now if it wasn't working before. Um,
It's working.
it's working. Okay, thank you guys. The little thing, the little green thing wasn't moving, so I didn't know. All right. So across a lot of Texas, I'm sure lawns are probably looking really, really good because we've had a good bit of rain. But I do think this is still a good time to maybe start thinking about it's like this is like the precursor dates or months to when lawns start to look pretty bad. And there's usually a timeline to when many of these turf pests show up. And we're not quite there yet. So this is a good time to really kind of think about it, keep your eyes on things. So when the lawn does start to look bad, you can maybe diagnose what some of those issues might be. That being said, everybody blames bugs for when your grass looks bad. And in reality, most of the time it has nothing to do with the insects, or if even insects are there, they're not really causing the damage. It's a time of year when that lawn is super stressed, so it's going to look awful anyway. And then what little bit of damage the insects are doing is exasperated. So if you're seeing damage in your turf, be a good investigator and detective and try to figure out if you've got maybe an irrigation issue. Is it just too darn hot and that grass is really stressed out? Are there things going on? And instead of immediately blaming the insects, because if we treat for the insects, it still isn't getting to the root of what the issue is with that turf. So with all things, when it comes to pest control, we want to try to utilize integrated pest management where we're justifying that we're finding that insect and we're not treating unless we're justifying that, because otherwise you're just putting out pesticide and you're just kind of doing it willy-nilly without knowing if it's going to actually do anything. So a lot of the management suggestions that we'll give or that I will give maybe like some cultural kind of control things, not really much physical control necessarily, although there are some when it comes to turf pests. Biological is not really there. Chemical, though, is the little tiniest part. So a lot of emphasis on cultural control, meaning like, are we using right varieties? Are we treating this grass the way that it should to give it the chance to be as healthy as it can? And then as a last resort, oftentimes using pesticides, but through monitoring and identifying that you actually have an insect that will be affected by that pesticide instead of just applying it and kind of, praying. Also, I would also consider the time of year. And this is not a turf example, but this is just a good example that I think we can all kind of relate to a little bit. So a lot of times aphids will get onto crepe myrtles and your cars are parked under it and it's like hard to open up your doors and it's just kind of a mess and people want to treat for those aphids. But it usually is occurring November, December, January, somewhere in that time frame. And what's going to happen to that plant? The leaves are going to fall off anyway, and it's going to have regenerate new growth in the spring. And so really, what is the justification to apply a pesticide to the environment when we could leave those aphids to do what they're doing and be food for something else, because it's not keeping the plant from doing what it's supposed to do. So also think about that with turf. Is it a time of year when maybe that grass is going to go dormant? Is it a time of year when that species of insect that you seem to be concerned with or that you are concerned with isn't even out there? We'll talk about timelines a lot, but justifying, making sure that the insect is there causing the damage that you're seeing, it's the result of it, and that the timing is correct is really important. There's also a fabulous website if you guys haven't found it or haven't used it. Aggieturf.tamu.edu has a bunch of really good information. And in the little sidebar that they have, there's a tab where you can go to publications. And on the publications, there's some really hefty resources. So they have a really, really good resource. It's dated, I think. I gotta move this box to see the date. It was last updated in 2017. I know that the Aggie Turf group is working on trying to do an update, so it's almost 10 years old. But inside of it, there are tables. So you could, if you have a weed issue and you know what your weed is, if it's a disease and you know what the disease is, if it's insects, it lists this disease. These are your options for treatment as far as chemicals go. And same thing for insects, which which is helpful, but also almost too easy. But that's usually what your question is like, I got this problem. What do I spray? How do I fix it? Right? You want the easiest, quickest solution. And that resource kind of gives it to you in the easiest way. So use it. If you haven't found it and you haven't used it, it's a really fabulous and it's a free resource. So I should have had like an outline kind of a slide here, but we're jumping right on into the insects. So there are not a whole lot of insects that are um, turf pests. You might be surprised. There's a lot of things that live in the grass and in the turf, but not all of them are necessarily a problem. The two big ones are white grubs and chinch bugs, things that you've probably heard about, you know, if you appreciate your lawn or you've been a homeowner and you've taken care of your lawn for a while. We're also going to talk a little bit about sod webworms because depending on where you are in the state, they can every now and then just kind of pop up as a weird issue, usually not a consistent issue like maybe chinch bugs and white grubs. And then I think I have two types of ants that I consider to be a turf pest, not because they chew up your turf, but they're found in usually turf situations. So we'll talk a little bit about fire ants and also about leafcutter ants. So in reality, there's not really a whole lot of other things. Beyond that, maybe army worms, mole crickets, but there's really limited number of insects that utilize turf as their actual host plant. So white grubs are one of those. They are a type of scarab beetle. We only have two or three species. I think we have two species of this Phylogophaga genus, but there's only two to three species of white grubs or June bug looking things that actually utilize turf as their primary host. There are another 2,000 species that look just like these guys or very similar to them that can be found all over the place. Their little grubs can look very similar and they can be found in other locations. So kind of keep that in mind. It's a limited number, and these are the ones that use only turf as their host. So white grubs, the adult that you just saw in the other pictures are not the damaging form. The damaging form is the larvae. The adults just are, you know, an indication that they might be around. And their damage is really uncharacteristic. You can't really look at it and say, yeah, I think that's definitely white grubs. They feed below the soil on the roots. And so you have dead patches of turf. It's really irregular. And that's also fairly typical of an insect causing damage. If it's symmetrical, ringed in some way, like it looks the same throughout the grass, then you're probably looking at a disease instead of an insect. So it's kind of these irregular patches of dead grass looks a whole lot like drought stress, and they're only really active during the times of years when we get drought stress. So it's hard to know, is that damage from them or from the drought? Over 100 different species of these guys, but only those few actually cause damage to the turf. So if you're finding them around your porch lights at night, I wouldn't panic, even if you're finding a lot of them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're in the turf, right? But justification is important, and you can do this. He's got a special tool for that. But by taking samples of the turf or cutting into about a square foot patch and peeling it back to see if you're finding grubs there. Because if you don't find any grubs, then applying that pesticide is probably going to cause more issues than it would otherwise. So a long time ago, not within recent years, Cornell University did a study, and I think they surveyed probably landscapers, homeowners. I don't exactly know how the survey happened, but what they found from that survey is that over 75% of white grub treatments were not necessary. So most of the time we are treating for white grubs and we don't need to be treating for them. We tend to look at grass that looks bad and that's our immediate blame when it's not actually the cause. And that's not, you know, environmentally justified. You're killing off non-targets, whether those are beneficial insects, those are lizards, they're, you know, other things, right? So in a homeowner situation, you kind of want to take a wait and see approach instead of being proactively treating for white grubs, unless you know this is an issue that you've dealt with and you know they're in that turf year after year. If you're on a golf course, they can't do that because the turf is their livelihood. And so they don't do this wait and see approach, but we tend to be able to most of the time as homeowners. So the way that you know you have them is not by the adults, but by digging into the soil, peeling it back a bit and looking to see if there are these small little grubs. So they're not very large. They're only about half an inch or smaller. Of course, much smaller when they come out of the eggs, but they never get much larger than half an inch. So if you're catching or finding huge grubs, usually this is in your compost, maybe a vegetable bed, places where you have good organic matter in your soil, those are not white grubs and they're not going to hurt your grass. They're decomposers and they're really not going to hurt your plants unless your plant roots are decomposing. And then that's another issue that you're dealing with. Um, they are spotty. So there used to be a lot of uh, I guess people would say when you peel back a square foot patch, you really need it to be, you need to have 5 or more grubs to justify treatment. If your grass looks bad and you're finding grubs, I think that justifies treatment. But because they're so spotty, you could have taken this patch just adjacent to it and not collected that many or not seen that many in the grass. I do think that this is a bit of a doctored picture or staged where they've kind of thrown them on the surface because they will be a lot dirtier and they'll kind of be trying to bury under. So you may have to do some digging to see if you can come across them. Sometimes you might have excessive or extra hog damage. But this is not necessarily a sign that you have white grubs. A lot of people say, oh, I got armadillos and I have hogs in my grass that they must be after the white grubs. Let me kill the white grubs. They're just rooting around for food. And there's all sorts of things in that soil. So just because you have activity by those animals doesn't necessarily mean they're there because of white grubs. What you could also see, and this is when it gets really bad, is because they're feeding on those roots, the grass just gets picked up. It's not holding onto the soil because there's no roots to bind it to that. So if it's more like a rug or carpet, then that is more of a sign that you have white grubs. I think that the timeline of their life cycle is super important. So there's a small window of opportunity when treating for them will actually do something about the issue. And oftentimes we are missing that window. So if we'll just start at, if we start at spring, well, you know what, I'm gonna start at kind of midsummer. So this is about this time of year, I would say. We're moving on into the summer months. Depending on where you are in the state, if you're further down south, you're certainly in this time frame probably. But if you're further up north, it may be shifted a little bit. So I'm sorry, let's just say that we're in late spring. So this time of year, you're going to start to see a little bit more activity of the adults. The adults are emerging out of the ground from that pupa stage, which was not doing any feeding at all. So if you're seeing damage and you're blaming white grubs, they're not the cause because the pupa cannot do damage and the adults do not feed on the roots and they really actually don't even feed on the blades of grass. So they're flying out. They're going to start mating. And in about they lay eggs after they've mated. And in about 2 weeks, those eggs will hatch. And they turn into these little teeny tiny grubs that are like teenagers. They eat so much. So the young instars or the young molts of the grubs are doing the majority of the damage. And this is happening during the summer months. The most damage is visible at the end of summer, so August, September. But that's also when drought damage and drought damage and heat damage is also showing up in your turf. So that's again why justifying treatment is important. But by the time most of the damage becomes visible, they're starting to shove themselves further into the soil and they're not feeding as much. And they're molting and they're getting larger. And as fall happens, they're far deep into the soil. They're not going to encounter any pesticide, but they're also not continuing to cause damage. And then through the winter, they will spend the winter months deep in the soil as a non-feeding larvae. And then they'll start to move up in the soil, pupate, and start this whole cycle all over again. So in the center of Texas, so let's just say like San Antonio area to Austin area, your prime time to treat to kill the grubs that are doing most of the damage is going to be around mid-July. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's correct. Around mid-June to mid-July. So you have this kind of month window, giving yourself a good buffer zone, I guess, in case it's a cooler summer or it's a hotter summer. If you're further down south, I would shift that a month. You're talking like mid-May to mid-June is the prime time to treat. So if you're down south and you've been hotter than the rest of us have, now's a fine time for you to treat for grubs. And if you're further up north, like you're up in North Texas Panhandle area where it's been a little bit cooler, you can shift that a little bit further, and you could say maybe mid-July to maybe mid-August, or maybe end of June to end of July. But as a rule, mid to end of June sounds pretty good for the majority of Texas as a good time to treat. We do have products now that you can do a little bit earlier treatment, and it will stay in the soil long enough to catch them when they start moving around and getting active. So depending on what you use, that could be as early, as right now. Well, I guess we're at the end of May now, but could be as early as mid-May. So damage in the fall and winter is not caused by grubs. Damage in early spring is not caused by grubs. The damage is happening in the summer and really shows up when everybody's grass looks pretty crummy, usually around August. And there's a lot of options that you can use to treat for white grubs. You're going to be using most of the time a granular formulation so that it can bind to the roots of the soil. I'm sorry, bind to the bits of the soil. And as they crawl through, they're going to get a contact dose, a lethal contact dose on their body and hopefully die. This Bacillus thuringiensis, you probably might be able to find, you can find anything on the internet, but that is something that's a little bit easier for a commercial guy to get their hands on. But we have a lot of different products, right? You can do like 7 products. This is mainly for spot treatment. It's not really, that's a lot. It's going to be expensive, and it's just going to kill a bunch of stuff if you do it all over the place. And then a lot of the neonicotinoids are going to bind to the root. They're going to bind to the soil and stay in that soil. And so as they crawl across, that's where they get it on them. Before you apply, I would water really, really well. If you had rain last night, and you put out your stuff for grubs, that's perfect. You want to water well because you want them to come up further. Get that ground saturated, get them moving up high, and that way they come in contact with that insecticide. The other most common insect that causes damage in our turf, and by the way, white grubs don't care what kind of turf you are in. It's all varieties and all species of turf. Chinch bugs, on the other hand, tend to prefer St. Augustine more than other things. While they're found in other varieties of turf, St. Augustine exhibits the most damage. So these are a type of true bug. They're not like the white grub where they had that complete life cycle of an egg, larvae, pupa, and adult. Instead, they're a little more primitive, and they lay eggs, and this is like a brand new little baby nymph, and those nymphs will molt. And the adults and the immatures are all doing feeding. So you kind of get this exponential damage. They move to new locations by walking, not by flying, even though they have wings, which means their spread is fairly slow, right? And you'll see it progress. It's not going to hop and jump. And they reproduce really quickly. So they 3 to 6 generations a year when it's really hot, certainly 6 generations a year. So there's a lot of offspring in the grass at certain times, causing a lot of damage. And their damage can be a little bit more characteristic. So what you will see is a dead patch of grass that is ringed with a yellow halo. And that, of course, will be adjacent to live grass, right? So you can kind of see really more out here, it's kind of yellowing. But when I look at this picture, I would guess chinch bugs if you told me it was St. Augustine grass, but also because it's always on the hot spot of the yard. So wherever the sidewalk is, the driveways are, if it's a corner house where the asphalt from the street is, an area like if you have a red brick house and the sun is just beating into that red brick and it's radiating out, that's where usually the dead starts, and then it grows from there. So when you're looking around, if it's a spot in your yard that gets the most water, it's not chinch bugs. But if it's an area that's more of a hot spot, whether it gets great irrigation or not, it could be where chinch bugs are. Or it's an area that's not getting irrigation, and so the soil is much hotter than the other parts of the lawn. I think I have some other, maybe I don't, maybe I have other pictures coming up. So I always ask a couple questions if someone calls and says they have chinch bugs. First, I know what month it is, right? So is it one of the warm months because they thrive when it's hot? They thrive when it's hot because their immatures do not thrive when it's hot. So, or not their immatures, because their natural enemies thrive when it's do not thrive. And so they're able to kind of go out of control. Cooler months, natural enemies keep them in check. So you'll find them, and you can find them in turf probably 12 months out of the year, but it's the hot months when they just wreak a lot of havoc. I also will ask what kind of turf it is, and if it's not St. Augustine lawn, then I'm a little bit reluctant to say it's for sure chinch bugs, because usually they're not causing a lot of damage in other grass. And then asking other things like, is it next to asphalt? Are you in those hot spots? And can you send some pictures um, to help just kind of rule out or say, yeah, it's pretty suspicious that you probably have chinch bugs. You can see them. This is a little immature right there. You can see them with your eyes. I think there's another one over on this side. The one on the right is like a really awful picture, but gives you an idea of their size. So they're visible to the eye. They're just not obviously large, right? Um, I would also do like an irrigation audit to figure out, do you have, a moisture issue going on? Because the hotter the soil, the happier they tend to be. And you can monitor for them, right? You can justify and prove that they're there. You can handpick and see if you can find them at the thatch area, or where the thatch is starting to build up. Or you can do what's used to be called the coffee can method, but I think they call it the float method now. But it's hard to find a coffee can that's metal. But a coffee can, a PVC pipe, anything that's a cylinder, and you can kind of get it into the soil, or underneath the turf a couple inches at least, because you want to get it into that thatch to try to get them to move up. They're not subterranean. They're on the blades of grass. They're just not on the top of the grass. They're kind of where the grass is meeting the soil, right? So let me see if I have a picture. Yeah. So you can cut the bottom out. So you have a sleeve, a cylinder, and place it adjacent to the dead grass. You might straddle the yellow and the green grass, because they've already killed the dead grass and they've moved on. And then the yellow grass is dying and it doesn't have a lot of energy left to give them, and they've moved on into that green grass. And you just pour a little bit of soapy water, do about half a cup of soap per gallon of water. So not very much. You could pour it with water and then just squirt some soap in there, and that will kill them. They can't crawl out. It also forms a surface tension, so they can't get out of there. So they float, and you can count who you have. And when they rise to the surface, I would leave it. I wouldn't leave it more than 45 minutes, but within 15, they should try to float up there. Um, I guess you could try to like get a stick or something and mess with the grass in there to try to dislodge them in case they're like hanging on real tight, but they'll float to the top. And then if you find these little bugs, I would maybe try to collect them, take them inside, see if you can identify them, and don't just assume it's them right away. That's justification to treat. They're obviously causing this damage, and treatment would be warranted in that case. As far as cultural control goes for chinch bugs, they're thriving in that thatch. And so if you can reduce thatch, that can help. If you can aerate, that helps. You're just getting kind of airflow and making it where they're not quite so happy. Proper mowing practices, just so you don't end up in a situation like this where you have all this thatch and really no blades of grass. Proper mowing practices are going to equate to happier and healthier turf. We also know that if you increase fertilization, you've kind of fertilized them. So I think that's something sometimes we'll do, is when we see that our turf doesn't look good, we think, well, if we try to think of all the things to do to make it look better, and fertilization might be one of those. So if you think you have chinch bugs, don't fertilize thinking you're going to help that grass grow, because it may actually help them grow as well. And then you kind of negated fertilizer's not cheap, so you kind of negated that effort. Also, watering practices, it's kind of a fine line, because if you water too much, then you choke out a lot of the microbes that will break the thatch down that they're thriving in. But if you water too little, then you make it nice and dry, and the chinch bugs like it. So you just don't want to underwater, and you just don't want to overwater. And what that is, I mean, I can't figure that out for my own yard. Management for these guys, there's a lot of products that are probably going to have a dual thing on the label. It's going to say, it might say grub and chinch bug control. I think that probably a liquid, like a foliar application, is more likely to give you better kill than granules. But if you have a whole lot of thatch, then the granules are probably going to be better because it's going to bind inside there as opposed to just kind of sitting and the pesticide sitting and floating on the top. Um, and liquid, even though a liquid is probably going to give you a better application, more contact with those bugs, it's more of a pain to try to apply it that way. You got to have, the right equipment and all that kind of stuff. So the granules tend to be just a little bit more foolproof. And then read the label, because sometimes certain labels, and this is maybe not necessarily for homeowners, but maybe more on the commercial side, may say like, you got to put this out before they hatch. And so then if you are seeing white chinch bugs in your turf, then that's not the pesticide I would choose. And then some will say like apply when the first damage appears. Others might say to look for the little baby instars, which are the pinkish orangey ones, and it's more effective on those younger ones. So just read the label and see if it has guidelines as to the life cycle before you go out and buy it. Okay, so sod webworms are not super common. They are primarily in South Texas, but you can get them in we've had outbreaks before in Dallas and as far south as the Austin area, we certainly get them. They are more prevalent in the South because they will overwinter as the larvae. And so when we get hard freezes, the larvae will die off. So populations will kind of plummet. And so they kind of just stick around in the southern parts. So the moths are just kind of these boring, ugly little things. The caterpillars are these little green caterpillars, probably green because they're eaten on green grass. They are found on all grasses, but just like chinch bugs, they're very particular to St. Augustine. St. Augustine can have some big problems, but it's also sometimes the only option you have when you have all those big oak trees in your yard. And they do the funniest thing. It's like somebody came and just mowed a little part of your yard. So you'll have really short grass next to your tall grass, but you didn't actually do any mowing. And this will happen overnight. It happens very, very quickly. And if you get down and you start looking on the sides of the blades of grass, you'll see where they chomp these cute little bite marks that they made. The damage or this kind of terminated tips that you see kind of in the background, I think that's just from mowing, and probably not having a real nice sharp mower. But if you look at the blades of grass, you'll see where they chomped it. And it's just weird. It's just weird. And it's actually, I think it's kind of funny. You want to justify treating them, right? So like this could be, who knows what this could be, right? It could just be the water isn't getting there properly. You could maybe mistake this for white grubs or even chinch bug damage, even though I don't really see yellowed in anything. But if you do this kind of similar to with chinch bugs, fill up a 5-gallon bucket, do about a tablespoon of lemon soap per gallon of water. So, half a cup to a fourth a cup for about 5 gallons. Lemon flavored soap because the lemon irritates them. So it gets them wiggling a whole lot more. And then you just drench that area with that soapy water and the caterpillars will start to come to the surface. And, it's just soapy water. So really, what's it going to hurt? Other than wasting, gallons and gallons of water, I wouldn't drench in the area that they've chewed on. I would go right on that that transition between the short and the long because they're probably moving on into that long grass right there. And then this is an example of that on that Aggie Turf website, that really good publication, where you would find sod webworms in the table and it lists all the products you can have. And if we went through all these products, I bet you some of them have different names, or maybe aren't out on the market anymore. Maybe, one company got bought by another one and so they changed the names. But go by the active ingredients because those things those will not be changing other than things not being available on the market any longer. But the trade names are the ones that just make these publications obsolete pretty quickly. So they say 15 or more sod webworms per square yard justifies treatment. But if you don't like what they're doing to your yard and you're finding them, I think that's justification for treatment as well. There's a lot of different options that you have. And because they're really not they'll like go down to the crown, like to where the soil is, but they're really not subterranean to my knowledge. I don't believe, but caterpillars can do funny things. So probably a granule isn't going to be as effective as a liquid application. Okay, so fire ants and leafcutter ants, not technically a turf pest because it doesn't really hurt your grass, but it's found in the turf and nobody likes it. And we've had a ton of rain throughout a good chunk of Texas. And when we have rain, these big fire ant mounds pop up because they don't want to drown. And so they push everybody up above the ground and they make those big, fluffy, subterranean, pillowy nests. And when you kick it, they come out from everywhere. They possess a stinger. You can see the little stinger, kind of see the stinger. It's like a splinter right there. So they'll bite and then they sting. And the sting is what is so painful to us. The bite, you don't really necessarily feel. The sting, you feel over it. A lot of other ants get confused for fire ants. Sometimes leafcutter ants do. They make these kind of cavernous mounds, but they'll also just like make a big, like the soil is just raised above where everything else is. And then you see kind of holes everywhere. Just, it really depends on the type of soil that they're found in. Harvester ants are also called red ants, Texas red ants. They have an area, usually a circle, devoid of any foliage. And in the center or close to the center, you have this entrance or exit hole that they're coming in and out of. And then one that I think really gets confused for tiny fire ant mounds because they're really common in urban areas are pyramid ants. They don't make a pyramid shaped mound or anything, but they make kind of a small fluffy mound that could be maybe 6 inches in diameter. It's not huge. Usually they're small, but and their little ants look like fire ants, but there's a hole, a center hole that they're coming in and out of. Fire ants have no center hole. It's just fluffy and they come out from everywhere. So there's different ways that you can treat for fire ants. You can treat individual mounds. That's good if you only have a handful of mounds to go after. Um, and it works fairly. That's a faster acting way to do it. Or you can broadcast. And so broadcasting can treat the mounds that are too small to see, good during drought conditions. Usually one treatment takes care of it. Depending on what you use, you're applying less pesticide in the environment. And depending on what you can use, it can either act really fast or it can act slower, like take up to 2 weeks. But it just depends on what you're using. So individual mound treatments tend to be drenches, dusts, and applying a bait directly to the mound, whereas a broadcast is a granular treatment or a fire ant bait product. And so, drenches, you're pouring it on that mound and hoping that pesticide gets everywhere. Dusts usually are sprinkled on top. Sometimes read the label. Sometimes it will say to water it in, and other times it will say just to sprinkle it. And one reason why applying a drench especially is not super, or I shouldn't say it's not super effective, but sometimes you might notice they just moved. Like, how did I just moved them. I just irritated them and they went somewhere. Well, think about when that mound pops up. Like, look in your yard. You probably have one that popped up between the sidewalk and the grass or the driveway and the grass. It was underneath that driveway or that sidewalk, most likely, because this is an example of like a vertical mound, but a lot of times they'll also go horizontal. It is what you see above the ground is just the tip of the iceberg, right? So when you apply a drench, there's no way it's going that deep. Excuse me. Excuse me. There's just no way that that liquid is going to go that deep in the ground. And so you have these little pancake looking things. Those are like little galleries where there could be queens laying eggs. It's just part of the colony. And so if you kill this chunk and they can detect that pesticide, all these little stringy like pieces are now going to kind of curve off to the side. And that's why you get those mounds that pop up, 3 or 4 feet away from where you treated. So sometimes the drenches are not super effective, and that's why. Granules are a broadcast. You're applying it all over the ground. This is the same way that you would treat for grubs. So same product could kill grubs, chinch bugs, and fire ants potentially. And it can provide results for about 6 months. So if you have a really severe allergy, this is what you want in your yard for fire ants. If you are very cognizant about natural enemies and non-targets, anything that's burrowing through this soil is going to be negatively affected by this product. So it's not for those that want to conserve the fauna and the floor, I guess, yeah, the fauna in your yard, but it is for those that really got to kill what's crawling in that turf or in that soil. Baits are usually what we recommend for fire ants because tends to be less amount of pesticide that you're putting out in the environment and very attractive to the fire ant. So not host specific to fire ants, but very attractive to them. So they take it out of the environment, get it in that mound, and don't do what this guy's doing where he's putting it on the mound. Do a little bullseye around it because they're going to think this is trash. They don't look for food on top of their house. They're foraging for food outside of their house. So just a ring around the outside of that, what that mound is, or if you're going to treat it individually, or you throw it out like chicken food, or you buy the little turn thing and you just, broadcast around your yard. They pick it up, they take it inside, they feed it to everybody. Everybody eventually dies. Depending on how big that mound is, this can take up to 2 weeks, and that's why this is usually considered slower acting. There's a product called, oh, the active ingredient is indoxacarb. I can't remember what Advion, I'm sorry, Advion is the Advion is the trade name or the brand name. It is not going to be found at Lowe's or Home Depot. It is more for commercial, but you don't have to have a license to purchase or apply it. So you can still find it online. But it works really quick. So if you really like baits, but you need them dead in a couple days, that's the option. But you're paying for that option. And a lot of other ants really don't like fire ant bait. And when fire ants are present, they will outcompete those other ants. We've done study after study where we put out hot dogs. Fire ants love that hot dog, greasy stuff. Other ants like it too. And so we'll identify the species of ants that are found on a grid system in an area, treat with a bait, and within 2 weeks, we check at 2 weeks, check at 4 weeks, extend. By the end of the project, and almost immediately, it turns over. Instead of primarily catching fire ants on those hot dogs, now it's native ants. And the healthier your native ant population, the easier and stronger they are to push those fire ants out. But when you allow fire ants to come in and start growing and growing, then they start to suppress your native ants. And ants are good, right? They aerate the soil. They're food for other things. They're just part of our native ecosystem. Lots of different options for fire ant baits. I would say, well, these are kind of, Come and Get It is spinosad. So it is organic. I believe it's OMRI certified, and it is also labeled for use in a vegetable garden. Amdro has a bajillion different options for you too. That's kind of the industry standard, homeowner standard. And that's fire ants on a hot dog. They love hot dogs, cheap hot dogs. The other things to consider, so like read the label for rates, don't over apply. If you give them too much bait, they tend to ignore it. Like they think there's always going to be food there. I don't know. Apply the bait fresh when you open it. If it smells like potato chips, it's good. If it smells chemically or plastic, then it's gone bad. So old bait is probably not good anymore. Don't water it in. It needs to be palatable. And if it's wet, we don't eat soggy toast. They're not going to eat soggy bait. So also it shouldn't have rained within a 48-hour window. So it rained a ton in San Antonio last night. Today would not be the day I would put out fire ant bait. And then, they're mainly active when it's above 75 degrees, which is most of the time, but they also become not as active when it's super duper hot. So then you would apply probably in the evening when they're coming out, when it cools down a bit. Okay. Leaf cutter ants are another one. If you've never had leaf cutter ants, you think they're just the coolest, most rainforesty type of an ant. It's actually native to Texas. Otta texana is their genus and species name. And they make these little volcanoes, right? Where they're taking the soil out and kind of kicking it out, and it makes these volcanic looking type of mounds. And when it rains, kind of compacts that, and it takes them a minute to build back up again. They're very interesting. I have all these theories about them and questions about them, but there's not, there's a lot of like, why are they doing this stuff? And, if only they would tell us. So if you're seeing these gigantic things, those are the alates. They may be trying to pop out a colony somewhere nearby, so you probably want to kill them. I actually got a really cool picture from somebody, I think it was from a pest control guy, asking what they were, and it was a queen that was excavating her first nest. And that was, for me, that was a really cool picture to see. They will strip the leaves off of plants. They don't have a preference, but anecdotally, they do seem to love fruit trees, so peaches, citrus, things like that. They love crepe myrtles, they love roses, and then after that, they'll go after whatever the heck they can get their hands on. And so they cut leaves, and now the plant has no leaves and it can't photosynthesize, and so it could die, right? They're not killing it by eating anything, they're killing it by stealing its photosynthetic properties. And they will carry this back into their mound and they'll chew on the edges and grow fungus. They are fungus farmers. That's what they feed on. So sometimes when they are not active anymore, we kind of assume that maybe they've brought enough back in, they've grown enough fungus that they don't have to go out and forage. So, it's not that a colony dies, it's like it just becomes self-contained in a way. But this is irritating, so irritating if these are your leaves. If they're not your leaves, it's kind of cute to see these little things walk around with a little sail on its back. And there's a little fungus. And I know what you're thinking. Why don't we just develop something that kills the fungus in their nest, so that they starve and they die? And I promise you, people have tried and we just haven't figured it out yet. Their nests are insane. This is not one in, I don't even think in the United States, but it was the best example that I could find. But this is what you would see in a very established mound in Texas. And so you can, if they're too close to your house, that can damage your foundation. If it's on a road, I mean, I know ranchers who have fallen into holes because they're driving over the road and this is what's underneath it. So they are cool, but they're actually a structural issue. So you really don't want them, in places that you're driving and or have a structure. This product is not out on the market anymore, except maybe if they have old ones at stores. It's now called Ant Killer, Amdro Ant Killer. That product works pretty well against leafcutter ants. You sprinkle it around the towns and around where they're foraging. If you see them carry it in, you're going to start to see reduced activity. Nothing will eliminate them, but it can suppress them. And hopefully it can suppress them to the point that you can have your plants, leaf back out again. But if you have leafcutter ants, you want to monitor them a lot. And once they start becoming active, put out more Amdro Ant Killer. Like don't let them rebound, basically. The results can be kind of hit and miss, but lately it sure seems like it's more hit than it is miss, which I think is good. And don't do things to irritate them. Like don't step on their holes, don't pour it right in their holes, don't make them abandon this one spot and not pick up what caused them to abandon it. Broadcast it, put it along the side of their trails, just, on tippy toes around these guys so that you hope that they pick up that food. And only do it when they're foraging. So when it's really, really, really hot, if they're coming out, they're excavating. They're not actually looking for food. And so putting that out is going to get ignored, or they're going to put it in a trash pile. So do it in the evenings when it's really hot, or when you see them carrying their food along, and watch them. If they pick up the little pieces of bait and they go into the holes, it's going to start working. It just may take a couple treatments. It may not, who knows? The other thing that you can do is contact a pest control company. And I would absolutely do this if this is what it looks like in your yard, because it can damage the structure of your home. There's a product that we use for termites. It's mainly used for termites, but it's for structural pests that can cause damage to your structure, right? Well, when they're this close to your foundation, they are absolutely a potential to cause damage to the structure. But Termidor, the pests have to be found within 1 foot of the structure, or associated with it. And so if the mounds are in the middle of your yard, you can't use this product by the label. But if they're up against it, then yes, you can. And that you do have to be licensed to use. And you could buy this stuff, you can get your license, but you're going to spend a whole lot more on all that than you would just by contacting a pest control company. And have them do it right, get the guarantee on it, and then you have a little bit of peace of mind. Termidor probably can eliminate them because it binds to the soil and stays there for so long. So that's the only one that I know that will probably cause elimination of a colony. Another thing that you could probably try, and this would also be with a pest control company, we've had some really good results using Alpine, adding a foaming agent, and or without it, but you inject it into those towns. The foaming agent is nice because if it pops up out of the other holes that you got really good coverage. And it tends to, it has shown good results as far as suppressing those colonies for 6 to 12 months. But if you've got leafcutter ants and you can suppress them for 3 months, you're probably happy. Or you can try sticky stuff, right? So you can use like tanglefoot or other things, and you can try to salvage the plants that you don't want to kill or that you want them to kill. This is really your only option if the mounds are not on your property and you can't convince your neighbor to do anything about it. All you can do is do sticky stuff or some sort of a barrier, cheap pesticide around the base of those plants if you can. The thinner the stalk of the plant, the harder that's going to be, but you're just trying to physically prevent them from getting to that leaf material. All right, and that's it. I know there's a question here that I'm going to pull up and try to answer for you. Again, if you guys don't, if you like podcasts and you want to learn more about bugs, we did a whole podcast actually recently on fire ants. So if you want to learn a little bit more about fire ants, I think that one went out beginning of this month. And then that QR code should take you to be on my email list if you're not already on it. Okay, so there was a question. Do I know of a general residential turf management guidebook that would cover watering, fertilization, and pest control? Not all of those three at one time, but there is a okay. I'm gonna find this for you so I can put a link in there. There we go. There is a really good publication by on our AgriLife Learn. In fact, that's just what I'm going to do. I'm going to put in AgriLife Learn, and then you can .tamu.edu. I think I spelled that correctly. But that website has all of our publications, and so you can maybe filter it down to turf, because I recently discovered a really good publication by our Aggie Turf group that had tables based off of your zone or your like major urban area, and are you around it, I guess. And it said when to put out the first fertilizer, when to do the last fertilization. It had a lot of, it was like it was a gem. So I always learn spell check something. So I would go to that agrilifelearn.tamu.edu if you could, and there's not one single thing, but it's a combination of things. Okay, let me pull this up. Can you recommend an effective but low toxic treatment for fleas in the yard? So I would use, I'm going to put this in the chat too so that you have it. You want I've lost my words. You want an insect growth regulator. That would be methoprene, pyriproxyfen, and I think there's a third one, but I can't think of it. But those are insect growth regulator. Since you can't really control the like what's bringing in the fleas, try to use something with an insect growth regulator so that when those fleas come in contact with it, the females can no longer lay eggs. So it's kind of like birth control for fleas or for for bugs. And that will help at least lower that population. So that would be lower toxicity to like other non-targets that aren't insects. But it's certainly other insects that get into it. It would affect them by not allowing them to lay many eggs. Pollinators are not going to come in contact with this because you're putting it on the soil. It's usually a granule. So if if you're concerned about other insects, think about where they go, and it could be location is separate, right? And then I would also treat the pets, right? If you're not already. And sometimes that's all you need to do, and you don't actually have to do anything in the yard. Okay, I think I got all. Okay, so you use a 5-gallon bucket with soapy water in under your porch lights, and you catch about 20 a night. I mean, it's not hurting anything, right? But you don't know what species you're catching. So you're just, you know, I don't know if you enjoy doing it, I don't think it's a waste of your time. How about that? Okay, let me stop. I'm going to stop recording. The next time that we have a webinar, by the way, is not going to be in. No, we do have one. No, we do not have one in June because I'm doing all of my kids camps. And so I have a camp that week and I cannot make the noon on the 25th, but we'll resume again in July where we're talking about what makes holes in your lawn. You're still going to leave and not know what made the hole in your lawn, but you'll have an idea of what could be making the hole in your lawn. So it's a little bit more of a fun one. You can access the recordings to this. I will send out another MailChimp with the link to that. It's a playlist. So if you bookmark that playlist link, then you can see any of them from that I've put up. There's only a few, and then any that come into the future. But I will shoot that out to you guys as soon as I have a couple minutes to do that.